The call came on a Tuesday. I remember because I was arranging fresh tulips in my favorite blue vase when my phone lit up with my son's name. Daniel hadn't called in months, and for a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe he was finally reaching out, ready to mend the distance that had grown between us. But that hope quickly faded as his voice came through, terse and businesslike. "Mom, Vanessa and I need to discuss the lake house with you. We're thinking of using it for the summer, and since you hardly go there anymore. No hello, no how are you. Just a demand disguised as a request, as if the property my late husband and I had lovingly restored over decades was simply an asset waiting to be claimed." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, feeling the familiar ache in my chest, not from my heart condition, but from the wound that never seemed to heal. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I'm going into the hospital tomorrow." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They found something on my last scan. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. When he finally responded, his voice was flat, almost annoyed. "Is it serious?" "Not concerned, just calculating." "They need to run more tests," I replied. "The doctor says I should prepare for an extended stay." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Well, I'm really tied up with the merger this month, and Vanessa has the charity gala. But keep us posted, okay? I'll try to swing by if I can find the time." If he could find the time. For his mother, who might be dying. I hung up the phone and looked out at my garden, the daffodils and crocuses pushing up through the spring soil, oblivious to how quickly life can change. What Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine as he dismissed me from his busy schedule, was that I had already changed my will. 3 weeks earlier, sitting in my attorney's office with trembling hands but resolute heart, I had made the most difficult decision of my life. My son wouldn't be visiting me in the hospital, but the consequences of that choice would follow him long after I was gone. I never expected my retirement years to look like this. At 68, I'd imagined spending quiet afternoons with my son and his family, watching my grandchildren grow, perhaps traveling a bit. Instead, I found myself alone in a 4-bedroom house in Oakwood, the neighborhood where Daniel had grown up, surrounded by memories but rarely by people who mattered. My name is Eleanor Wilson, Ellie to my friends, though those have become fewer as the years have passed. My husband, Edward, died 6 years ago after 40 years of marriage. We weren't wealthy by Ridgemont standards, but we were comfortable. Ed had been smart with investments, and I'd worked as an executive assistant at Westridge Technologies for 30 years. Between my pension, our savings, and Ed's life insurance, I had about $3, $5 million. Not a fortune, but enough to live well and leave something meaningful behind. The trouble began, I suppose, 3 years after Ed passed. Daniel had always been ambitious, a trait we'd encouraged, but something changed in him after he married Vanessa and moved to Hillcrest Estates. The visits became less frequent, the phone calls shorter. When they did come over, conversation revolved around what I owned, subtle comments about my excessive space for one person, questions about my will and investments. "Mom, you really should consider downsizing," Daniel would say, eyeing the antique grandfather clock or the painting above the fireplace. "This place is too much for you to manage." But it wasn't. I loved my home, took pride in maintaining it, and found purpose in tending to the garden Ed and I had planted together. What Daniel didn't understand, or chose not to see, was that this house represented more than property to me. It held the echoes of his childhood laughter, the marks on the doorframe tracking his growth, the dent in the living room wall from when he'd thrown a baseball indoors despite our warnings. This was the home where I'd nursed him through chicken, pox and heartbreaks, where I'd stayed up late helping with science projects and college applications. This was where Ed and I had sacrificed and saved, passing up vacations and new cars to ensure Daniel could attend the university of his choice, without student loans. Perhaps I should have seen the warning signs earlier. When Daniel graduated from business school, we gifted him $50,000 for a down payment on his first home, money we'd set aside year by year, denying ourselves small luxuries. He accepted it with a quick thank you and rarely mentioned it again. When Sophia was born, I offered to watch her 3 days a week so Vanessa could return to her job at the architectural firm. "That's kind, Mom," Daniel had said, "but we've already arranged for a nanny, someone with professional childcare experience." The word stung, dismissing my decades of motherhood as somehow inadequate. Still, I persisted. I hosted holiday dinners, remembered birthdays with thoughtful gifts, attended school concerts and soccer games. I made myself available without being intrusive, loving without demanding love in return. When Tyler broke his arm skateboarding at 13, I sat with him in the emergency room because both Daniel and Vanessa were at work conferences. When Sophia struggled with algebra, I tutored her twice a week until her grades improved. I was there, consistently, reliably there, even as I felt my son's affection cooling into obligation. The real shift came when Ed passed away. Daniel had always respected his father, perhaps even feared him a little. Ed was gentle but firm, the kind of man who commanded attention without raising his voice. After the funeral, as we sat in the attorney's office reviewing the will, I noticed how Daniel's attention sharpened when numbers were mentioned. Later that evening, alone in my bedroom, I found myself wondering if I had somehow failed as a mother. Had I not taught him that family meant more than finances? That love wasn't measured in dollar signs and property deeds? 3 summers ago, I spent $25,000 renovating the lake house, replacing the dock, updating the kitchen, adding a screened porch where the family could gather on summer evenings. I'd hoped it would become a place where Daniel's family would want to spend time with me, creating new memories to fill the void Ed had left. That first weekend, watching Tyler and Sophia splash in the lake, hearing Vanessa compliment the new kitchen, seeing Daniel relax on the porch with a beer, I felt a flicker of hope. But by Sunday afternoon, Daniel was checking work emails, Vanessa was planning her next charity committee meeting, and the following weekend, they were too busy to return. I tried not to take it personally. Everyone has their own lives, their own priorities. But when my 70th birthday approached and Daniel suggested keeping it simple with lunch at a restaurant rather than the family gathering I'd hoped for, something inside me began to shift. I found myself wondering what I was holding on to and why. The realization was slow but inevitable. I had become an afterthought in my son's life, valuable primarily for what I could provide rather than who I was. Still, old habits die hard. When Daniel mentioned they were considering private school for the children, I offered to cover the tuition. "You and Ed did the same for me," he said, accepting without hesitation. When Vanessa wanted to renovate their master bathroom, I wrote a check for $30,000 as a just because gift. I kept giving, hoping that generosity might bridge the growing distance, that financial support might somehow translate into emotional connection. It was Martha who finally said what I couldn't admit to myself. We were having coffee at the cozy corner, and I was making excuses for why Daniel hadn't returned my calls for 2 weeks. "Ellie," she said, setting down her cup with a decisive clink, "when was the last time Daniel did anything for you? Not for your money, not for your house or lake property, but for you as a person who deserves care and consideration?" I stared at her, mouth opening and closing without sound. "That's what I thought," she continued. "You've turned yourself into an ATM, and he's forgotten there's a human behind the transactions." Her words hurt because they were true. That afternoon, I sat in my garden, the one Ed and I had planted together, the one I still tended with care, and allowed myself to feel the full weight of my situation. I had become a convenience in my son's life, a resource to be tapped when needed and ignored when not. The woman who had once been the center of his world, who had kissed scraped knees and cheered at graduations, had been reduced to a financial plan and an obligation. That evening, I called Daniel again. He answered on the fifth ring, voice distracted. "Mom, can I call you back? I'm just heading into a meeting." I took a deep breath. "Daniel, I'd like to have dinner this weekend. There's something important I want to discuss." A pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "This weekend is tough. Tyler has a tournament, and Vanessa's parents are visiting from Phoenix." "What about the following weekend?" I pressed, unusual for me. Another pause. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Let me check with Vanessa and get back to you." He never did. Instead, 3 days later, he stopped by unannounced during his lunch break. "You sounded concerned on the phone," he said, checking his watch as he declined my offer of coffee. "Is everything okay?" I studied my son's face, the same eyes as Ed's, the same cleft in his chin, and felt a surge of love mixed with disappointment. "I've been thinking about the future," I began carefully, "about what happens to everything when I'm gone." His posture changed immediately, becoming more attentive. "That's actually good timing, Mom. Vanessa and I were just discussing how you might want to add the grandkids to your will directly, for tax purposes, you know." In that moment, something crystallized within me. It wasn't just that he'd come running at the mention of inheritance. It was the complete absence of concern for why I might be thinking about mortality in the first place. No questions about my health, my happiness, my fears. Just strategies for maximizing his financial gain from my eventual death. "I'm considering some changes," I said neutrally. "I'll let you know when I've made decisions." He frowned slightly, checked his watch again. "Well, don't make any big moves without talking to me first. I know some excellent estate planners who could help you maximize the family's benefit." Not my benefit. The family's. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the house Ed and I had filled with love, touching familiar objects, remembering the life we'd built. In our bedroom closet, I found a box of Daniel's childhood drawings, stick figures labeled Mom and Dad, with hearts floating above them, school essays about how I was his hero, birthday cards with carefully printed "I love yous." When had that little boy, so full of affection and admiration, transformed into the calculating man who now saw me primarily as a financial asset? The next morning, I called Jonathan Blackwell, our family attorney, since Ed and I had written our first will after Daniel was born. "I need to make some changes," I told him. "Significant ones. Can we meet this week?" 3 days later, I sat in his wood-paneled office, hands clasped tightly in my lap as I explained what I wanted to do. Jonathan, who had known our family for decades, listened without judgment, taking careful notes. "Are you certain about this, Ellie?" he asked when I finished. "It's a dramatic shift from your previous arrangements." I nodded, my resolve strengthening, even as my heart ached. "Yes, it's time for me to make different choices." Over the next few weeks, I met with Bob Friedman, my financial advisor, reorganizing investments and establishing new accounts. I consulted with the director of the Second Chance Foundation, a local organization that provided educational scholarships to disadvantaged youth. I visited a retirement community called Riverside Gardens, with its charming cottages and vibrant social calendar. I was making plans, not out of spite, but out of a belated recognition that I needed to build a life centered on my own well-being rather than the futile hope of reclaiming my son's attention. The diagnosis came almost as an afterthought. I'd gone in for a routine checkup, mentioned some fatigue and shortness of breath. Tests were ordered, specialists consulted. "There's a mass," Dr. Chen said gently, her finger pointing to a shadow on the scan. We need to do a biopsy to determine exactly what we're dealing with, but given its location and appearance, we should prepare for aggressive treatment. I nodded calmly, asking practical questions about procedures and timelines. Only in the Itatsisa car afterward did I allow the tears to come, not just for the diagnosis, but for the knowledge that facing this battle would reveal just how alone I truly was. I called Daniel from the hospital parking lot, half hoping this crisis might awaken something in him, might remind him of the bond we once shared. "They found something," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm going in for a biopsy next week, and they're talking about surgery after that." His response was prompt but perfunctory. Offers to connect me with a colleague who knows someone at Mayo Clinic, questions about whether my insurance would cover everything, a promise to keep in touch. Not an offer to drive me to appointments, not a moment of shared fear or vulnerability, certainly not a recognition that his mother might need him now more than ever. In the days that followed, it was Martha who drove me to pre-op appointments, who sat beside me as the doctor explained surgical risks, who helped me prepare my home for my return. It was Robert who brought over homemade soup and fresh bread, who made sure my bills were organized for the weeks I'd be hospitalized. It was neighbors and church friends who arranged a schedule for checking my mail and watering my plants. Daniel called once, leaving a voicemail while I was meeting with the anesthesiologist. "Just checking in, Mom. Crazy week at work, but wanted to see how things are going. Call when you can." The night before my surgery, I sat in my garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the joy of raising Daniel, the partnership with Ed, the slow erosion of family bonds I'd once believed unbreakable. I wasn't angry anymore, just sad for what had been lost, and increasingly clear-eyed about what remained. The will had already been changed, the trust documents signed and notarized. My new estate plan reflected not bitterness, but reality, allocating my assets to those who had shown genuine care and to causes that would make a meaningful difference. As twilight deepened into darkness, I made peace with my decisions. Whatever happened on the operating table tomorrow, I had finally honored my own worth. I had recognized that love without respect is not really love at all, and that enabling someone's indifference only ensures its continuation. If I survived, and I fully intended to, I would build a different kind of life, one based on reciprocal relationships rather than one-sided sacrifice. And if I didn't, well, Daniel would discover that actions have consequences, and that his mother had finally learned to value herself as much as she had always valued him. The morning of my surgery arrived with a gentle rain tapping against my bedroom window. Martha came at 6 to drive me to Lakeside Memorial, helping me pack the overnight bag I'd prepared with careful attention to small comforts, my softest nightgown, lavender hand cream, the well-worn paperback I'd been reading. In the car, I checked my phone one last time. No messages from Daniel. I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation of his absence still stung. "He might still show up," Martha offered as we turned into the hospital parking lot. I smiled at her kindness, but shook my head. "No, he won't, and that's okay. I'm not alone." She squeezed my hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "No, Ellie, you certainly are not." The admission process was efficient, almost mechanical. Forms to sign, questions to answer, hospital bracelet secured around my wrist. Dr. Chen stopped by as I was changing into the gown, her manner professional but kind. "We're going to take good care of you, Eleanor," she promised. "The team is excellent, and we've reviewed your case thoroughly." I thanked her, appreciating her competence as much as her compassion. In the pre-op area, a nurse named Michael checked my vitals and explained what would happen next. "Is there family in the waiting room?" he asked as he inserted the IV line. "Your emergency contact is listed as Martha Jenkins. She's as good as family," I replied, watching the clear fluid drip steadily into my vein. "Better," in some ways. As they prepared to wheel me into the operating room, I felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever happened now, whether I emerged from this surgery to face recovery or slipped away to join Ed in whatever comes after this life, I had reclaimed my dignity. I had stopped allowing fear of abandonment to keep me tethered to a relationship that had become hollow at its core. The new will wasn't punishment. It was simply the final acknowledgement that I deserved better than what my son had chosen to give. As the anesthesia began to take effect, my last conscious thought was not of Daniel, but of the sunrise I hoped to see again, bright and clear and full of possibilities I was only now beginning to imagine. I woke to the steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell of hospital air. The ceiling above me was a blur of white tiles and fluorescent lighting, my mouth dry as sandpaper. "She's awake," someone said, and then Martha's face swam into view, her eyes crinkled with relief. "Welcome back, Ellie. You gave us quite a scare." It took me a moment to find my voice, raspy and thin. "How long?" Martha checked her watch. "About 6 hours. The surgery took longer than expected. Dr. Chen will be in soon to explain everything." I nodded, the simple movement requiring unexpected effort. Through the fog of anesthesia, I remembered why I was here, what they had found. And who wasn't waiting for me to wake up? Martha, ever perceptive, squeezed my hand. "I called Daniel again while you were in surgery, left a message with Vanessa." The unspoken reality hung between us. He hadn't come, hadn't called back. Even with his mother under the knife, my son couldn't break away from his carefully constructed life to sit in a waiting room for a few hours. "It's okay," I whispered, though we both knew it wasn't. "I'm not surprised." Dr. Chen arrived an hour later, chart in hand and lines of fatigue etched around her eyes. She pulled up a chair beside my bed, her expression serious but not grim. "The surgery was successful, Eleanor. We removed the mass completely, along with some surrounding tissue to ensure clean margins. The preliminary pathology suggests we caught it relatively early, but we'll need to follow up with radiation to make sure we've addressed any microscopic spread." I processed her words slowly, the implications filtering through the haze of post-surgical medication. "So, I'm not dying," I said finally, surprising myself with a small laugh. Dr. Chen smiled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Not if I have anything to say about it. The recovery won't be easy, and the radiation will be challenging, but your overall health is excellent. I'm optimistic about your prognosis." Martha clapped her hands together softly, tears springing to her eyes. "That's wonderful news," she said, beaming at me. I felt a curious mixture of relief and something else. Something like disappointment, though that wasn't quite right. Perhaps it was simply the realization that I would have to live with the consequences of the choices I'd made, including the changes to my will. There would be no easy escape from the difficult conversations that lay ahead. The first 48 hours after surgery passed in a blur of pain medication, vitals checks, and brief, fitful sleep. Martha came every day, bringing fresh flowers for the windowsill and updates from the outside world. My neighbor Robert stopped by with a thermos of homemade chicken soup, though the nurses insisted it stay refrigerated until I could handle solid food again. Even Jonathan Blackwell, my attorney, made an appearance, ostensibly to drop off a get-well card, but really, I suspected, to assure himself that I remained confident in the decisions we'd made about my estate. "Everything is in order," he told, me quietly, patting my hand. "You focus on getting better." On the third day, as I was attempting my first slow walk around the hospital floor with a nurse's assistance, my phone lit up with a text message. "Mom, hope you're recovering well. Sorry I haven't been by. Massive deadline at work. We'll try to visit this weekend. Daniel." No question about how the surgery had gone, no offer of help. Just a vague promise that might or might not be kept, depending on what else came. Up in his busy schedule. That evening, as I picked at the bland hospital dinner, I found myself thinking about Daniel as a child, how he would run to me with skinned knees or triumphant report cards, seeking comfort or celebration. How his face would light up when Ed and I arrived at school events, his small hand waving frantically to make sure we saw him in the crowd. When had that eager, loving boy become this distant, preoccupied man? Was it my fault somehow? Had I spoiled him, making his path too easy, removing obstacles that might have built character? Or was it simply the natural course of things? Children grow up, build their own lives, and sometimes those lives have little room for aging parents. The questions circled in my mind as night settled over the hospital, bringing no answers, only a deepening certainty that something fundamental had to change. On the 5th day, Dr. Chen signed my discharge papers, reviewing my at-home care instructions with both Martha and me. "You'll need help for at least the first week," she explained, "especially with the drain and changing dressings. After that, you can gradually resume normal activities, but nothing strenuous for 6 weeks. Radiation will start in about a month, once you've healed sufficiently from the surgery." Martha nodded, taking detailed notes. "I've got it covered," she assured the doctor. "We've worked out a schedule with some friends from church to help, with meals and transportation." Dr. Chen smiled approvingly. "Good. Strong support systems make a significant difference in recovery outcomes." I thought about Daniel, about the support system I should have had but didn't, about the fact that he still hadn't visited, still hadn't called directly, just that one text message, as if checking a box on a to-do list. I wondered what Dr. Chen would think if she knew, if she would judge me for raising a son who could be so indifferent to his mother's suffering. But perhaps she had seen it all before. Families fractured by expectations and disappointments, love transformed into obligation, and then into something even less substantial. Martha's compact sedan wasn't the most comfortable ride for someone, with fresh surgical incisions, but she drove with exaggerated care, slowing for every bump and pothole on the route back to Oakwood. We had just turned onto my street when she cleared her throat awkwardly. "Ellie, I should mention, there's a car in your driveway. Looks like Daniel's Audi." My heart gave a strange little lurch, hope mingled with apprehension. "He didn't mention he was coming," I said, reaching instinctively for my phone, which showed no new messages. Martha's expression was carefully neutral. "Maybe he wanted to surprise you. That would be nice." But her tone suggested she wasn't convinced of Daniel's motives, and honestly, neither was I. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw that Daniel wasn't alone. Vanessa sat in a deck chair on the front porch, scrolling through her phone, while Tyler and Sophia lounged on the front steps, both absorbed in their own devices. None of them looked up until Martha honked lightly to announce our arrival. "Grandma?" Sophia was the first to react, pocketing her phone and hurrying toward the car. At 14, she was all long limbs and uncertain grace, caught between childhood and adolescence. She reached for the door handle, then hesitated, suddenly aware of my condition. "Can I hug you? Dad said we have to be careful." I smiled, genuinely warmed by her concern. A gentle hug is just what the doctor ordered. She embraced me with exaggerated gentleness, and I breathed in the familiar scent of her shampoo, remembering when she used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories. Tyler approached more cautiously, offering an awkward wave. "Hey, Grandma. Glad you're not dead." Martha made a choking sound behind me, but I laughed, appreciating his teenage bluntness. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Daniel and Vanessa had made their way down the porch steps by now, Daniel carrying a small bouquet of store-bought flowers, Vanessa wearing the tight smile she reserved for obligatory social functions. "Mom," Daniel said, leaning in for a brief, careful hug. "You look good." It was an obvious lie. I was pale, gaunt, moving with the deliberate slowness of the recently wounded, but I accepted it with a nod. "It's nice to see you all," I said, including Vanessa in my glance. She stepped forward, air kissing near my cheek. "We wanted to be here when you got home," she said, "to make sure you had everything you needed." The words were right, but the tone was wrong, practiced rather than genuine, a social performance rather than a heartfelt concern. Martha helped me inside, Daniel carrying my small suitcase, the children trailing behind with varying degrees of interest. The house felt different. Somehow, too clean, too arranged. "We tidied up a bit," Vanessa explained, noticing my puzzled expression. "Hired a service to do a deep clean before you came home. Can't have you recovering in a dusty environment." I bit back the retort that rose automatically to my lips, that my house had been immaculately maintained, that dusty was hardly a fair description of the home I had kept with pride for decades. Instead, I thanked her politely, reminding myself that in their world, hiring strangers to clean was a gesture of care, not an implied criticism. Martha settled me on the living room sofa, arranging pillows to support my tender side. "Tea?" she asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "That would be lovely," I replied, then turned to Daniel. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot." He nodded, setting the flowers on the coffee table. "Of course, Mom. Family first, right?" The phrase hit me with unexpected force. Family first, something Ed and I had repeated throughout Daniel's childhood, a core value we had tried to instill through both words and actions. But it had become just that for Daniel, a phrase, emptied of meaning, trotted out when convenient. We made small talk as Martha prepared tea, the children's school activities, Daniel's upcoming business trip, Vanessa's charity committee. No one mentioned the surgery details or my prognosis, as if the medical reality was too uncomfortable to acknowledge directly. I answered their questions and asked my own, playing the role of gracious hostess despite being the one in need of care. It wasn't until Vanessa excused herself to take a call in the kitchen that Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Mom, we need to talk about next steps. Vanessa and I have been discussing options, and we think it might make sense for you to consider selling this place. It's too much house for one person, especially now with your health concerns." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Not even an hour home from the hospital, still wearing the special post-surgical bra that accommodated my drain, and already he was angling for the house. "This isn't the time, Daniel," I said quietly, conscious of the children nearby. "I'm not making any major decisions right now." He frowned, glancing toward the kitchen to ensure Vanessa was still occupied. "I'm not trying to rush you, but being practical is important. You can't manage alone anymore. That's just reality. We could help you find a nice condo, something manageable, or there are those upscale assisted living communities near Hillcrest." "I'm not going to assisted living," I said, my voice sharper than intended. "I had cancer surgery, not a lobotomy, and I'm not alone. Martha and Robert and the church group have arranged a care schedule." Daniel's expression hardened, a flash of the same calculation I'd seen when he first learned of my diagnosis. "Mom, you can't impose on your friends indefinitely. That's what family is for. Vanessa and I have discussed it, and we think the best solution would be to sell this house and the lake property. The proceeds could cover a very comfortable retirement community, and anything left over would be a nice nest egg for the grandkids' college funds." The sheer audacity of it, planning the liquidation of my assets while I was literally fresh from surgery, left me momentarily stunned. But before I could respond, Martha returned with the tea tray, her timing impeccable as always. "Here we are," she announced cheerfully, though her eyes darted between Daniel and me, sensing the tension. "Ellie, I've added honey just how you like it." Daniel sat back, his expression smoothing into bland pleasantness, the discussion clearly postponed, but not abandoned. As Martha poured the tea, I found myself thinking of the changes I'd already made to my will, changes that would upend the neat financial calculations my son was making. For the first time since signing those documents, I felt not guilt, but vindication. Vanessa returned from her call, sliding smoothly back into the conversation as if she hadn't missed a beat. Eleanor, we brought some prepared meals from that gourmet service in Hillcrest. They're in your freezer. Just heat and eat when you're feeling up to it. It was a thoughtful gesture, I had to admit, though I suspected it was meant to compensate for their absence in the days to come. Thank you, I said sincerely. That will be helpful. Sophia perked up suddenly, as if remembering something important. Oh, and I brought you something, Grandma. She dug through her backpack, producing a slightly crumpled handmade card decorated with glitter and pressed flowers. I made it in art class, she explained, handing it to me. Mrs. Hernandez said we should create something for someone who needs cheering up, and I thought of you. I opened the card carefully, touched by the simple message inside. Get well soon, Grandma. I love you. Love, Sophia. Tears pricked at my eyes unexpectedly. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you. This was the genuine article, not calculated, not performed, just a granddaughter's affection expressed through glitter and pressed daisies. I looked at Sophia's hopeful face and felt a renewed pang of grief for the relationship I'd lost with Daniel. How had I raised such a loving child, only to see that capacity for love seem to wither in adulthood? The visit lasted another hour, constrained by the obvious fact of my fatigue and, I suspected, by Daniel and Vanessa's other commitments. As they prepared to leave, Daniel pulled me aside once more. Think about what I said, Mom. We're only trying to help. I looked at my son, Ed's eyes in a stranger's face, and felt a complex wave of emotion, love and disappointment, anger and understanding. I know you think you are, I said carefully, but this is my home, my life. I'll make my own decisions about what happens next. Something flickered across his face, frustration perhaps, or surprise at my uncharacteristic firmness. He recovered, quickly, patting my shoulder with studied casualness. Of course, just don't wait too long. Properties like this are moving fast in the current market. And there it was again, the thinly veiled calculation, the assessment of my life in terms of market value and potential profit. As they drove away, Sophia waving from the back window, I felt both relief at their departure and a profound sadness for what our relationship had become. Well, Martha said, closing the front door and turning to me with raised eyebrows. That was something. I sank into the nearest chair, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Did I imagine it? Or was my son trying to liquidate my assets within an hour of my return from cancer surgery? Martha snorted, her diplomatic facade dropping now that we were alone. You did not imagine it. I nearly spilled the tea when I heard what he was suggesting. The nerve. She busied herself adjusting pillows and bringing me a glass of water, muttering under her breath about ungrateful children and vultures circling. When she had fussed enough to satisfy herself, she sat, in the chair opposite mine, her expression turning serious. Ellie, are you really okay? Not just physically, but with all of this? I considered the question carefully, looking around the living room where Ed and I had spent so many contented evenings, where Daniel had opened Christmas presents and built couch forts, and later brought home prom dates and college acceptance letters. No, I admitted finally. I'm not okay, but I will be. Martha nodded, understanding that my words encompassed more than just physical recovery. You know I'm here, whatever you need, and not because I'm angling for a spot in your will. The joke, edged with truth, made me laugh, despite the pain it caused my incision site. I know, Martha. That's why you actually have one. The first week home from the hospital established a new rhythm to my days. Martha stayed in the guest room, helping with the drain, changing dressings, and ensuring I took medications on schedule. Church friends brought casseroles and fresh bread, staying for brief visits that brightened the long afternoons. Robert stopped by daily, sometimes just to check if we needed anything from the store. other times to sit and read to me when my eyes were too tired for books. Daniel called once, a brief, awkward conversation about my recovery that ended with another mention of downsizing options he'd be happy to discuss when I was feeling stronger. I deflected gently but firmly, already knowing that conversation would never happen on his terms. The changes to my will weren't about punishment, they were about reality. My son had shown me, through consistent choices over many years, that he valued what I could provide over who I was. I had finally stopped pretending otherwise. By the second week, I was moving more easily, managing simple tasks around the house, and taking short walks in the garden. Martha returned to her own home, but came by daily, as did various members of my support network. I began sorting through old photographs in the evenings, not out of morbid preparation for death, but as a way of reconnecting with my own history, reminding myself of the full life I had lived beyond my role as Daniel's mother. There were pictures from before Daniel was born. Ed and me on our honeymoon in Quebec, laughing in the snow. My first day at Westridge Technologies, nervous but determined in a new Navy suit. Weekends with friends at the lake before we'd bought the property, young and carefree with our whole lives ahead of us. I rediscovered the person I had been, ambitious, spirited, full of my own dreams and desires, before motherhood had gradually reshaped my identity around Daniel's needs and wants. It was during this period of reflection that I received an unexpected call from Jonathan Blackwell. "Eleanor," he said, his tone carefully professional. "I wanted to give you a heads up. Daniel came to my office yesterday asking about your will and estate planning." I sat up straighter, wincing slightly at the pull on my healing incision. What did he want to know? "Everything," Jonathan replied dryly. "Your current will provisions, any recent changes, details about trusts or accounts." He presented it as concern for your welfare following your surgery, but it was fairly transparent. I closed my eyes briefly, unsurprised, but still disappointed. "What did you tell him?" "Only what I'm ethically obligated to disclose, which at this point is virtually nothing. I explained that client confidentiality prevents me from discussing your affairs without your explicit permission." He was persistent. The pause spoke volumes. "I'm sure he was," I said, imagining Daniel's smooth attempts at persuasion turning increasingly frustrated when they failed to yield results. "Did he mention that he's been encouraging me to sell my properties?" Jonathan made a sound between a sigh and a snort. "He did, in fact. Suggested that you might not be of sound mind to manage your affairs given your health situation." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Did he really?" "Don't worry," Jonathan assured me. "I've known you for 30 years, Ellie. I've seen you make careful, rational decisions through far worse circumstances than this." And I reminded Daniel that your cognitive abilities are not in question, only your willingness to follow his preferred financial plan. After we hung up, I sat in Ed's old armchair by the window, watching the neighborhood children ride bikes along the sidewalk. Daniel's attempt to circumvent me by going directly to Jonathan wasn't just presumptuous, it was revealing. He wasn't concerned about my welfare. He was concerned about his inheritance. The realization should have hurt, but instead I felt a curious sense of clarity, as if a fog had finally lifted. For years, I had made excuses for Daniel's behavior, attributing his growing distance and financial focus to stress, to Vanessa's influence, to the natural evolution of our relationship as he built his own family. I had shouldered the blame, wondering what I had done wrong as a mother to create this dynamic. But sitting there in the fading afternoon light, I understood that Daniel's choices were his own. I had given him every advantage, every opportunity to develop into a compassionate, generous person. That he had chosen a different path wasn't my failure. It was his. 3 days later, as I was reviewing some paperwork from the hospital's billing department, my doorbell rang. To my surprise, it was Sophia standing on the porch, backpack slung over one shoulder, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Grandma," she said when I opened the door, "can I come in? I need to talk to you." I ushered her inside, concerned by her unusual appearance on a school day. "Is everything all right, sweetheart? Does your father know you're here?" She shook her head, dropping onto the couch with the dramatic flair only teenagers can truly master. "No, and I don't care. They're being awful, Grandma. Just awful." I sat beside her, careful not to press too quickly. At 14, Sophia was navigating the complicated territory between child and young adult, her emotions often intense and mercurial. "What happened?" I asked gently. She twisted a strand of hair around her finger, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "I overheard them talking last night. About you, about the house. Dad said you were being stubborn and irrational, and that they needed to accelerate the timeline before you did something stupid with the money. Mom said maybe they should get you declared incompetent or something. It was gross, Grandma. Like they were." "I don't know. Plotting against you." I kept my expression neutral despite the shock and anger rippling through me. "I see," I said carefully. "And how did that make you feel?" Sophia looked at me directly, her young face fierce with indignation. "It made me feel ashamed of them. You just had cancer surgery, and all they care about is getting your house? It's disgusting." The unvarnished honesty of adolescence. Cutting. Straight to the heart of the matter without the polite fictions adults construct. "I came to warn you," she continued, "and to say I'm sorry. You don't deserve that, especially not from Dad." I reached for her hand, deeply moved by her loyalty and moral clarity. "Thank you for telling me, Sophia. That took courage." She shrugged, embarrassed now by her own emotion. "Whatever, it's just wrong." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her revelation settling between us. Then, hesitantly, she added, "Grandma, would it be okay if I came to visit you sometimes? Like, regularly? Without telling them?" I considered the implications carefully. I had no desire to put Sophia in the middle of conflict with her parents, yet I valued our relationship too, much to discourage her. "You're always welcome here," I said finally. "But I think we should be transparent about it. How about if I talk to your dad about setting up a regular time for us to spend together? Maybe you could help me with the garden now that I'm getting back on my feet." Sophia nodded, clearly relieved. "That would be cool. I'd like that." After Sophia left, I'd insisted on calling Daniel to let him know where she was despite her protests. I sat alone in my living room, processing this latest development. The fact that they were discussing having me declared incompetent was deeply disturbing, though perhaps not entirely surprising given Daniel's visit to Jonathan. It suggested a level of calculation and entitlement that exceeded even my adjusted expectations. More significant, though, was Sophia's reaction. Her instinctive recognition of the moral bankruptcy in her parents' behavior, her decision to warn me despite the potential consequences. In her, I saw hope that the values Ed and I had tried to instill in Daniel might still find expression in the next generation. That evening, I called Bob Friedman and asked him to come by the house the following day. If Daniel and Vanessa were accelerating their timeline, I needed to ensure my affairs were fully in order, with no vulnerabilities they might exploit. I also called Dr. Chen's office and requested a formal letter confirming my cognitive capacity to be added to my medical file and copied to Jonathan. These were precautionary measures, but after Sophia's warning, they seemed prudent. Bob arrived promptly at 10 the next morning, his briefcase bulging with folders and his expression concerned. "Eleanor," he said as we settled in the dining room with coffee, "Jonathan called me. I want you to know I'm deeply disturbed by what's happening." I nodded, appreciating his straightforward approach. "So am I, Bob. But I'm not surprised, not anymore. I need to make sure everything we've put in place is secure." For the next 2 hours, we reviewed my financial arrangements in meticulous detail, the trust for Sophia and Tyler, the donation structure for the Second Chance Foundation, the provisions for Martha and several other friends who had shown such care during my illness. We discussed contingency plans for various scenarios, including the possibility of a legal challenge from Daniel. "Your documentation is thorough," Bob assured me, closing his notebook. "Your competence is well established. Your decisions are rational and clearly explained in the supporting letters. There's very little grounds for contesting anything you've done." I sighed, feeling both relieved and saddened that such precautions were necessary. "I never imagined I'd be fortifying my estate plans against my own son," I admitted. "But here we are." Bob's expression softened with sympathy. "Eleanor, I've been in this business for 40 years. Family dynamics around money can bring out the worst in people, even those we thought we knew best. You're not the first parent to face this kind of situation, and sadly, you won't be the last." That night, alone in the house for the first time since my surgery, I found myself standing in Daniel's old bedroom, now converted to a home office, but still bearing traces of its original purpose. The growth chart marked on the closet door frame, the shelf that once held sports trophies now displaying reference books. I remembered the night terrors he'd experienced around age 7, how I'd sit beside his bed for hours, smoothing his hair back from his forehead until he fell into peaceful sleep. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike on the driveway, bandaging, scraped knees, celebrating lost teeth with quarters under the pillow. I had loved him completely, without reservation or condition. When had that ceased to be enough? When had my value in his eyes shifted from who I was to what I could provide? Standing there in the dim light, surrounded by the ghosts of happier times, I finally accepted the full truth. The son I had raised with such devotion now saw me primarily as a financial asset to be managed, an obstacle to his inheritance plans, a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. It was a bitter realization, but facing it squarely brought its own kind of freedom. I was done making excuses, done hoping for change, done measuring my worth by his approval. Whatever came next, whether confrontation or continued pretense, I would face it with clear eyes and the knowledge that I had done right by myself at last. The morning of my first radiation treatment dawned with unexpected brightness, October sunshine spilling across my bedroom floor in defiant opposition to my apprehension. 6 weeks had passed since the surgery, my body slowly healing. The drain, long removed, the incision fading to a pink line across my chest. Dr. Chen had been pleased with my progress at each follow-up appointment, nodding approvingly at my increasing stamina and the way the surgical site was healing. "You're doing remarkably well, Eleanor," she had said at our last meeting. "But remember, radiation is its own challenge, different from surgery, more of a marathon than a sprint." I understood her meaning now as I dressed carefully in the loose cotton clothing recommended by the radiation oncology nurse during my orientation session. 33 treatments spread over nearly 7 weeks, daily doses of invisible energy aimed at microscopic enemies that might still be hiding in my body. Not a battle won in a single surgical strike, but a long, steady campaign against an insidious foe. Martha had insisted on driving me to Lakeside Memorial for this first treatment, though I had begun taking short drives to nearby locations on my own. "First days are significant," she declared when I protested that I could manage. "Besides, I want to see this radiation set up for myself. Make sure they're taking proper care of you." Her protectiveness brought a warmth to my chest that had nothing to do with my healing incision. In the weeks since my return from the hospital, Martha had become something more than a friend, a sister of choice, bound by ties of loyalty and care that sometimes seemed stronger than blood. As we pulled into the hospital parking garage, I found myself wondering what my life would have looked like if I had recognized sooner the true value of such friendships, instead of pouring all my emotional energy into the increasingly barren soil of Daniel's affection. The radiation oncology department occupied its own wing of the hospital, a space designed with an obvious attempt at soothing aesthetics, nature photographs on the walls, soft instrumental music playing at low volume, furniture in calming blues and greens. But nothing could fully disguise its true purpose, evident in the specialized equipment glimpsed through partially open doors and the quiet efficiency of staff dressed in scrubs and lab coats. I checked in at the reception desk, noting that the woman who took my information wore a name tag identifying her as Jasmine and a small pin shaped like a purple ribbon. "First session?" she asked kindly, noting my tense posture. When I nodded, she smiled. "Dr. Patel is wonderful, and our technicians are the best. You're in good hands here." I thanked her, appreciating the simple human connection in this clinical environment. Martha and I had barely settled into the waiting area when a door opened, and a young woman in blue scrubs called my name. "That was fast," Martha remarked, giving my hand a quick squeeze. "I'll be right here when you're done." The treatment itself was surprisingly anticlimactic. Positioning on the table, technicians moving around me with practiced precision, the massive machine humming as it rotated to various angles. "You won't feel anything during the procedure," the lead technician David had explained during setup. "No heat, no sensation at all. The actual treatment only takes a few minutes." He was right. If not for the mechanical noises and movements of the equipment, I might not have known anything was happening at all. Afterward, as I changed back into my street clothes, I felt a curious mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that it had been painless. Disappointment that something so consequential could seem so mundane. There was no dramatic moment marking the beginning of this crucial phase of treatment. Just the quiet notation in my chart that session 1 of 33 was complete. Martha was waiting as promised, a paperback open on her lap, though I suspected she hadn't read a word. "How was it?" she asked, standing as I approached. "Quick," I replied. "Almost too easy." She nodded, tucking the book into her purse. "The nurse told me that's how it starts. It's the cumulative effect you have to watch for. By week 3, your body will know something's happening." As we walked back to the car, Martha chatted about plans for a small gathering at her house the following weekend. Nothing strenuous. Just a few friends, good food, catching up. And I found myself grateful for the normalcy of it. Cancer had already claimed enough of my life. I refused to let it define every conversation, every social interaction, every moment of my remaining years. We had just turned onto Maple Street, about 10 minutes from my home, when Martha suddenly gripped the steering wheel more tightly. "Ellie," she said, her tone cautious. "Isn't that Daniel's car in your driveway?" I peered through the windshield, immediately recognizing the sleek black Audi parked beside the oak tree. "Yes," I confirmed, a knot forming in my stomach. "He didn't mention he was coming by today." Martha's face set in lines of protective concern. "Want me to keep driving? We could get lunch and come back later." The offer was tempting. To postpone? Whatever conversation awaited me, to delay the inevitable tension that seemed to accompany every interaction with my son. But running away had never been my style, not even now. "No," I said firmly. "Let's see what he wants." Martha nodded, respecting my decision but clearly unhappy about it. "I'll stay as long as you need me to," she promised as we pulled into the driveway behind Daniel's car. "Just give me a signal if you want backup." Daniel was sitting on the front porch steps, scrolling through his phone, his expression distracted. He looked up as we parked, pocketing the device and standing with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mom," he called, approaching as Martha and I exited the car. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. I touched my purse, realizing I'd silenced my phone before the radiation treatment and forgotten to turn the volume back on. "Sorry about that," I said, not offering further explanation. "This is a surprise." Daniel's gaze flickered to Martha, a hint of annoyance crossing his features before he masked it with that polished charm he used so effectively in business settings. "Martha, good to see you again. I was hoping to catch Mom alone for a quick conversation, actually. Family matters. The dismissal was clear, though couched in polite terms. Martha raised an eyebrow, looking to me for direction. Martha's welcome to stay, I said mildly but firmly. We were about to have some lunch. Would you like to join us? I moved toward the front door, keys in hand, not waiting for his response. Inside, Daniel made a visible effort to hide his frustration, accepting a glass of iced tea from Martha with stiff courtesy. We settled in the living room, an awkward triangle of forced politeness. So, I began, what brings you by today? Daniel set his glass down carefully on a coaster, one small habit from childhood that had apparently stuck. I've been concerned, Mom. After our last conversation, I realized I might have come across as insensitive. I wanted to check how you're doing, see if there's anything you need. The words were right, the tone almost convincing, but something in his carefully neutral expression made me doubt his sincerity. I'm doing well, I replied. The surgery was successful, and I've just started radiation today. 33 sessions ahead of me, but the prognosis is good. Daniel nodded, a flash of genuine relief crossing his face. Whatever his other motivations, he didn't actively wish for my death, at least. That's great news, he said. And for a moment, I glimpsed the son I remembered, the one capable of authentic human connection. But then he continued. And have you given any more thought to what we discussed? About the house? This might be the perfect time to consider downsizing, while the market's still strong and before you get too deep into treatment. Martha made a small, involuntary sound, something between a scoff and a cough, quickly disguised by taking a sip of tea. Daniel glanced at her, then back at me, clearly frustrated by her presence. Daniel, I said calmly, I'm not selling this house. Not now, and most likely not in the foreseeable future. I understand you're concerned, but this is my decision to make. His expression hardened, the mask of solicitude slipping further. Mom, be reasonable. You just admitted you're facing 7 weeks of radiation. You'll be exhausted, possibly sick. This place is too much for you to handle on your own. I'm thinking about your welfare. I smiled, not unkindly. Are you? Or are you thinking about the equity in this property and how it might be better utilized? The bluntness of my question clearly startled him. It was unlike our usual dynamic, where I softened difficult truths and he controlled the narrative. That's unfair, he protested. Of course I'm concerned about you, but it makes practical sense to consider these options now, before circumstances force your hand. I leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact. Daniel, let me be absolutely clear. I am not selling this house. I am not moving to assisted living. I am not liquidating assets to fund your children's education or any other purpose you might have in mind. My financial affairs are in order, and they will remain private unless and until I choose to discuss them. The color rose in his face, his expression shifting from surprise to indignation. Private? Mom, I'm your son, your only child. Who else would handle your affairs if not me? There was genuine bewilderment in his question, as if the idea that I might make arrangements that didn't center him was incomprehensible. I have made appropriate plans, I said simply, with professional assistance. If and when you need to know details, you'll be informed. Daniel's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the armrests of his chair. You've changed, he said accusingly. Since the diagnosis, you're different. I nodded, accepting the observation without defensiveness. Yes, I have. Near-death experiences tend to clarify priorities. Martha, who had been silent throughout this exchange, stood abruptly. I think I'll make those sandwiches now, she announced, moving toward the kitchen with deliberate purpose, giving us a moment of privacy while remaining within earshot, a delicate balance of support and space. Daniel watched her go, then turned back to me, lowering his voice. Is she the reason for this? Has she been filling your head with ideas, turning you against your own family? The suggestion was so absurd, so fundamentally misaligned with the reality of my relationship with Martha, that I almost laughed. No, Daniel. Martha has been a true friend, offering support when I needed it most. But my decisions are my own, based on decades of experience and observation, including my observations about how you and Vanessa view my role in your lives. He flinched as if I'd slapped him, then quickly recovered, his expression shifting to something more calculated. I don't know what you think you've observed, but you're wrong. We value you enormously. We want what's best for you. What's best? For me? I repeated slowly. Or what's most convenient for you? Daniel stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back, his frustration palpable. This is ridiculous. I came here to help, to check on you after your treatment, and you're treating me like some kind of a vulture. I sighed, suddenly weary of the dance we'd been performing for years. Daniel, when did you last visit or call just to spend time with me? Not to discuss properties or finances or what I might do for you, but simply to enjoy my company. When did you last ask about my interests, my thoughts, my feelings, anything beyond my health status as it might impact your plans? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly searching for examples and coming up empty. That's not fair, he finally managed. I've been busy, work, the kids, Vanessa's commitments. Life gets complicated. I nodded, acknowledging the partial truth in his defense. Yes, life does get complicated, but we make time for what matters to us, Daniel. That's the reality neither of us can escape. Martha returned with a tray of sandwiches, her timing once again impeccable. Lunch is served, she announced, setting the tray on the coffee table. Turkey and avocado, Ellie's favorite. Daniel, would you like one? Her tone was pleasant, but cool, the offer perfunctory rather than warm. Daniel glanced at the food, then at his watch, clearly looking for an exit strategy. Thanks, but I should be going. I have a conference call at 2. He turned to me, his expression a complex mixture of frustration, calculation, and what might have been genuine concern buried under layers of self-interest. Mom, think about what I said, about the house, about everything. I'm only trying to help. I nodded, not agreeing, but acknowledging that I'd heard him. Thank you for stopping by, Daniel. Give my love to the children. He hesitated a moment longer, perhaps hoping for a more conciliatory response, then nodded stiffly. I'll call later this week to check how the treatments are going. Martha showed him to the door while I remained seated, suddenly aware of how much energy the conversation had drained from me. When she returned, her expression was thunderous. That boy, she muttered, dropping onto the sofa beside me. I swear, Ellie, if he weren't your son. I smiled faintly. I know, but he is my son. For better or worse. We ate our sandwiches in companionable silence, both processing the interaction in our own ways. Finally, Martha spoke. You stood your ground beautifully. I was proud of you. I considered her words, realizing she was right. I had maintained my boundaries without anger or defensiveness, had spoken my truth without seeking to wound or punish. It was a small victory, but significant. Perhaps the first time in decades I had engaged with Daniel as an equal, rather than as a mother desperate for connection at any cost. It felt different, I acknowledged. Not easier, exactly, but clearer somehow. Martha nodded, understanding what I couldn't fully articulate. That's what happens when you stop carrying other people's responsibilities. The view gets a lot clearer. She gathered our plates, heading to the kitchen. Now, how about some of that lemon cake Robert brought over yesterday? a little celebration of your first radiation treatment and your first step toward a healthier relationship with Daniel. I smiled, grateful beyond words for her presence in my life. That sounds perfect. The next 3 weeks fell into a steady rhythm. Radiation treatments each morning, followed by increasingly necessary rest periods as the cumulative effects began to manifest. Dr. Chen had warned me about fatigue, and by the 3rd week, it arrived. With a vengeance, a bone-deep exhaustion unlike ordinary tiredness, impossible to ignore or push through by sheer will. My skin at the treatment site grew red and tender, requiring special creams and gentle care. Despite these challenges, I found myself approaching each day with a curious blend of resignation and resolve. This was simply what had to be endured. To reach the other side, to claim whatever portion of life remained for me. I was determined to use it more wisely than I had the previous decades, to fill it with genuine connections rather than one-sided obligations. Daniel called twice during those weeks, brief, awkward conversations that skirted around the tensions of our last meeting while never quite addressing them directly. He didn't visit again, citing work pressures and the children's busy schedules. I accepted these explanations at face value, neither challenging them nor offering reassurances that his absence was understood. It was Sophia who maintained the most consistent contact, texting almost daily with updates about school or questions about my health, occasionally stopping by on her way home from volleyball practice. These visits became bright spots in my increasingly restricted routine, her teenage energy and unfiltered observations bringing life and laughter into rooms that sometimes felt too quiet. It was during Sophia's 3rd visit that I first broached the subject of the garden. "I'm thinking of redoing the back flower beds this spring," I mentioned as we sat on the porch swing, enjoying the crisp autumn air. "Something more sustainable, with native plants that need less water and maintenance." Sophia perked up immediately. "That sounds awesome, Grandma. My biology teacher is big on native plants. She says they're better for local pollinators and the whole ecosystem." I smiled, pleased by her interest. "Exactly. But I'll need some help with the planning and planting. Someone with good eyes and strong hands." She caught my meaning instantly, her face lighting up. "I could help. I mean, if you want me to. I don't know much about gardening, but I could learn." The eagerness in her voice touched something deep within me. A reminder of simpler connections, of relationships based on shared experience rather than transaction. "I'd like that very much," I told her. "We could make it a regular project if you're interested. Saturday mornings, perhaps?" She nodded enthusiastically, already pulling out her phone. "Let me check my calendar. Most Saturdays should work, except when we have tournaments." We settled on a schedule, and as she left that afternoon, there was a new bounce in her step, the satisfaction of being genuinely wanted, genuinely needed for exactly who she was. That evening, as I was preparing for bed, my phone rang with an unexpected call from Daniel. "Mom," he began without preamble, "Sophia tells me you've enlisted her for some kind of gardening project." His tone was neutral, careful, but with an undercurrent of suspicion that immediately set me on edge. "Yes," I confirmed. "We're planning to redesign the back flower beds in the spring." She seemed quite enthusiastic about it. There was a pause, the sound of a door closing on his end. "Mom, I appreciate that you want to spend time with Sophia, but her schedule is already packed. College applications are coming up faster than you think, and every extracurricular matters." I took a slow breath, refusing to be pulled into the defensive position he was attempting to place me in. "Daniel, this was Sophia's choice. She's welcome here anytime, but I'm not enlisting her for anything she doesn't want to do. And frankly, colleges also value family connections and intergenerational activities. Not everything has to be resume building." Another pause, longer, this time. "Look, Mom, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but you have to understand. After our last conversation, it feels like you're trying to drive some kind of wedge between us and the kids. First, the changes to your will that you won't discuss. Now, this secret gardening project with Sophia. I cut him off, my patience wearing thin. There is nothing secret about spending time with my granddaughter, Daniel, and my will is not a topic for discussion, particularly not in this context. If you're concerned about Sophia's time management, that's a conversation to have with her directly. She's 14, quite capable of determining whether she wants to spend a few Saturdays. Mornings helping her grandmother in the garden. Daniel's frustration was audible in his sharp intake of breath. That's not the point, Mom. The point is that you're making unilateral decisions that affect our family without consulting us. The statement was so revealing of his perspective that my relationships, my property, my very life were somehow committee decisions in which he held a controlling vote, that I almost thanked him for the clarity. Instead, I replied calmly, "No, Daniel, I'm living my life according to my own values and priorities. Sophia is welcome here. If she chooses to come, I'll be delighted to see her. If other commitments take precedence, I'll understand. But this isn't actually about Sophia's schedule, is it?" His silence confirmed my suspicion. This was about control. Control he felt slipping away as I established boundaries and made choices that didn't center his interests. Finally, he spoke, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "I don't know what's happened to you, Mom. You were never like this before. Stubborn, secretive, pushing away the people who care about you most." I closed my eyes briefly, recognizing the manipulation in his words, but no longer susceptible to it. What's happened is that I've faced my mortality, Daniel. I've been forced to evaluate what matters most in the time I have left, and I've discovered that I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my peace, my autonomy, or my self-respect to maintain the illusion of a relationship that exists primarily when you want something from me. The words hung between us, honest in a way. Our conversations rarely were. "If that's really how you see our relationship," Daniel finally said, "then I don't know what else to say." I sighed, a bone-deep weariness settling over me that had nothing to do with radiation effects. "Neither do I, Daniel. Neither do I." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, watching moonlight spill across the carpet in silent silver patterns. There was sadness in the exchange, certainly, the grief of acknowledging a relationship that had evolved into something unrecognizable from its beginnings. But there was also a curious sense of freedom, of burdens set down after being carried too long. I had spoken my truth without anger or accusation, had maintained my boundaries with quiet dignity rather than emotional manipulation. It felt like growth, like healing of a different kind than what my body was struggling through. As I finally lay down to sleep, I found myself thinking of Ed, what he would make of this situation, how he would have handled it. Ed had always seen Daniel clearly, had recognized his tendency toward entitlement and self-interest even when I made excuses or looked the other way. "Love doesn't mean blindness, Ellie," he'd tell me gently when I defended our son's more questionable choices. "Sometimes the most loving thing is to let people face the consequences of their actions." I hadn't been ready to hear it then, too afraid of losing the relationship, too invested in the role of endlessly supportive mother. But now, facing the possibility of a foreshortened future, I finally understood what Ed had been trying to teach me all along. The following Saturday, I was surprised when the doorbell rang promptly at 9 a.m. Opening the door, I found Sophia on the porch, dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Ready for gardening research?" she asked brightly, holding up a canvas tote filled with notebooks and what appeared to be library books. I checked out some stuff on native plants and sustainable garden design. Ms. Rodriguez, my biology teacher, gave me a list of recommended resources. The sight of her, so eager and unaffected by the tensions between her father and me, brought a surge of genuine joy. "Come in," I said warmly. "I've got hot chocolate and cinnamon rolls waiting in the kitchen. We can spread out at the dining table." As we settled in with books and notebooks, steam rising from our mugs, I felt a deep sense of rightness. This was how relationships should be, built on shared interests and mutual respect, rather than obligation or ulterior motives. We spent the morning poring over plant catalogs and garden design books, making lists of native perennials and sketching possible layouts for the flower beds. Sophia's enthusiasm was infectious, her questions thoughtful, her suggestions often surprisingly insightful for someone with limited gardening experience. "Dad didn't want me to come today," she confided as we were cleaning up our materials around noon. "He said you were trying to complicate things and that I should focus on SAT prep instead." She rolled her eyes with typical teenage disdain, as if looking at flower books is going to ruin my college chances. Besides, I'm only a freshman. SATs are like forever away. I kept my expression neutral, not wanting to draw her into adult conflicts. "Your father wants what's best for you," I said carefully. "We just sometimes disagree about what that looks like." Sophia gave me a surprisingly shrewd look. "He's mad about money, isn't he? I heard him and Mom talking. Something about your will and the house." The directness of her question caught me off guard. I considered deflecting, offering some platitude about adult concerns, but Sophia deserved better than condescension. "Yes," I admitted. "Your father and I have different perspectives on how I should manage my affairs. But that's between him and me. It's not something you need to worry about." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my honesty. I figured, Dad gets weird about money stuff, like when Grandpa Wilson died and left everything to Uncle James. Dad didn't talk to him for almost a year. This was news to me. Ed's father had indeed left the bulk of his modest estate to his younger son, who had struggled financially due to health issues. But I hadn't realized Daniel's resentment had run so deep or lasted so long. As Sophia gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door, her expression suddenly serious. "Grandma, you're not going to die soon, are you? From the cancer?" The question, so direct and unvarnished, brought a lump to my throat. "Not if I can help it," I answered honestly. "The doctors are very positive about my prognosis. The radiation is difficult, but it's working." She nodded, relief visible in her young face. "Good, because I really want to plant that garden with you in the spring, and maybe learn to make Grandpa's famous apple pie in the fall, and possibly convince you to let me redecorate the guest room where I stay. It needs, like, a major update." Her casual planning for our future together, her assumption of continued connection, was perhaps the most healing thing I'd experienced since my diagnosis. "It's a deal," I told her, giving her a gentle hug. "The garden in spring, pie in fall, and we can talk about the guest room redecoration. Eventually." She grinned, the momentary seriousness dissolving into her usual teenage exuberance. "I'll start a Pinterest board. See you next Saturday, Grandma." After she left, I moved slowly through the quiet house, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: joy from the morning with Sophia, lingering sadness about Daniel, determination about the path I had chosen. In the kitchen, I noticed Sophia had left one of her notebooks behind, likely accidentally. I picked it up, intending to put it aside for her next visit, when a loose page fell out. A sketch, I realized, of a garden design. But not just any design. She had drawn our backyard with remarkable accuracy, including the oak tree and the old stone bench Ed had installed years ago. The flower beds were rendered in colored pencil, blooming with what I recognized as native wildflowers and ornamental grasses. And there, on the stone bench, were two figures, one clearly meant to be me, the other Sophia, sitting close together surrounded by the garden they had created. Beneath the drawing, in her looping teenage handwriting, she had written, "Grandma Eleanor's Healing Garden, a place to grow together." I stood there in the kitchen, the simple drawing in my trembling hands, overwhelmed by the pure, uncomplicated love it represented. This was what mattered. This was worth protecting. This was the future I wanted to nurture, whatever time I had left. By the 5th week of radiation, the cumulative effects had settled into my body like an unwelcome tenant. The skin across my chest had darkened to an angry red, sensitive to the touch and requiring special creams applied with the gentleness one might use for handling delicate tissue paper. Fatigue had become my constant companion, a heavy cloak I couldn't shed no matter how much I rested. Simple tasks like preparing a meal or sorting laundry now required careful rationing of my limited energy. Yet amid these physical challenges, I found unexpected moments of grace. Martha bringing over homemade soup and staying to share it at my kitchen table. Robert stopping by with fresh flowers from his greenhouse. A particularly kind radiation technician named Lily who always had a gentle touch and a reassuring smile. Most precious were the Saturday mornings with Sophia, our garden planning sessions now expanding to include seed catalogs and discussions about soil composition, her enthusiasm undimmed by my increasing need to take rest breaks during our work. It was after one such Saturday, as I was dozing in Ed's old armchair with Sophia's garden notebook open on my lap, that the doorbell rang with unusual insistence. Not a single press, but a repeated, demanding series that suggested the visitor's impatience. Struggling to my feet, I made my way slowly to the front door, energy already depleted from the morning's activities. Through the peephole, I saw Vanessa standing on my porch, arms crossed tightly over her designer blazer, foot tapping a staccato, rhythm on the welcome mat. I considered briefly, pretending I wasn't home, a cowardly impulse I quickly dismissed. Whatever had brought Vanessa to my door unannounced and clearly agitated, it wouldn't improve with avoidance. Taking a steadying breath, I opened the door. "Vanessa," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "This is unexpected. Please come in." Her gaze swept over me, taking in my appearance with poorly disguised shock. The weight loss, the pallor, the careful way I held myself to minimize discomfort. For a moment, genuine concern flashed across her features, quickly replaced by her usual composed expression. "Eleanor," she acknowledged, stepping past me into the foyer. "I apologize for dropping by without calling. I was in the neighborhood for a committee meeting and thought we should talk. In person." I led her to the living room, moving more slowly than I would have liked, aware of her impatient energy as she followed. "Can I offer you something to drink?" I asked, the ingrained habits of hospitality asserting themselves despite my wariness. "No, thank you," she replied, perching on the edge of the sofa, her posture rigid. "This won't take long." I lowered myself carefully into Ed's chair, grateful for its familiar support. "What can I do for you, Vanessa?" She hesitated, clearly rehearsing her approach one final time before launching into it. "It's about Sophia," she began. "These Saturday meetings need to stop." The bluntness of her statement, delivered without preamble or explanation, momentarily stunned me. "May I ask why?" I finally managed, keeping my voice steady despite the unexpected attack. Vanessa shifted, recrossing her legs and adjusting the cuff of her blazer, small, nervous gestures at odds with her assertive tone. "She's becoming too attached, too involved in whatever you're planning here. It's distracting her from more important priorities." I considered my response carefully, mindful of the precarious position Sophia would be in if this became an outright battle. "Sophia and I are designing a garden," I said simply. "It's a creative project we both enjoy, and it gives her an opportunity to apply some of what she's learning in her biology class. I'm not sure what more important priorities you feel this is undermining." Vanessa's expression tightened, her carefully applied makeup creasing slightly around her eyes. "College preparation for one. She needs to be focusing on activities that will strengthen her applications: debate team, student government, volunteer work with recognized organizations. Not Gardening. She said the word as if it were synonymous with some frivolous waste of time, something beneath the aspirations she held for her daughter. Vanessa, I said gently, Sophia is 14. College applications are still years away. And spending time with family can be just as valuable as formal extracurriculars, perhaps more so. Many universities look for well-rounded individuals with strong family connections, not just lists of activities. Vanessa leaned forward, dropping any pretense of casual conversation. Let's be honest, Eleanor. This isn't really about gardening or quality time. This is about you trying to influence Sophia, to turn her against us the way you've turned against Daniel. The accusation was so unexpected, so divorced from reality, that I found myself momentarily speechless. Turned against Daniel? I finally echoed, genuinely bewildered. Vanessa, I haven't done any such thing. Daniel and I have had some disagreements about my personal decisions, but I've never spoken negatively about him to Sophia or attempted to influence her in any way. Vanessa laughed, a short, harsh sound with no humor in it. Please, we know exactly what you're doing. First, the mysterious changes to your will, then the refusal to consider sensible housing alternatives, and now this sudden interest in bonding with Sophia. You're trying to buy her loyalty, to ensure she sides with you when everything comes to light. The paranoia underlying her accusations was so stark, so disconnected from my actual intentions, that I found myself wondering if she was projecting her own strategies onto me. Vanessa, I said, keeping my voice calm despite the anger building within me. My relationship with my granddaughter is not a battlefield for whatever conflict you perceive between yourselves and me. Sophia comes here because she wants to, because we enjoy each other's company. There's no manipulation, no hidden agenda. Vanessa stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back, her agitation visible in every movement. She comes here because you're playing the victim, the poor abandoned, grandmother battling cancer alone. You're using her kind heart against her, making her feel obligated to spend time with you. The cruelty of the accusation hit me like a physical blow, driving the breath from my lungs. That she could twist something as genuine as my relationship with Sophia into something so calculated, so manipulative, revealed more about Vanessa's worldview than she perhaps intended. Is that truly how you see this situation? I asked quietly. That I'm playing the victim by having cancer? That I'm using my illness to manipulate a 14-year-old girl? Vanessa had the grace to look momentarily chastened, though she quickly recovered her combative stance. That's not what I meant, but you can't deny you've changed since the diagnosis. You've become difficult, unreasonable. Daniel is only trying to help, to make sure you're properly taken care of, and you've shut him out completely. I took a slow breath, gathering my strength for what needed to be said. Vanessa, I appreciate that you and Daniel believe you're acting in my best interests, but you need to understand something fundamental. My life is my own. My home, my finances, my relationships, these are not committee decisions. I am still competent, still capable of determining what's best for me. I paused, watching her expression harden with each word. As for Sophia, she is welcome in my home anytime she wishes to come. If you and Daniel decide to forbid these visits, that's your prerogative as her parents. But it would be a decision based on your issues, not on what's best for her. Vanessa's face flushed with anger, her composure cracking further. You're unbelievable, she hissed. After everything we've done for you. All the times we've included you in family events, consulted you on decisions, kept you involved in our lives. And this is how you repay that consideration? The revisionist history was so blatant, so contrary to the reality of our interactions over the years that I almost laughed despite the tension of the moment. When was the last time they had consulted me on anything that didn't involve my financial contribution? When had they ever adjusted their plans to accommodate my inclusion? I think, I said carefully, that we have very different memories of how our relationship has functioned. But regardless, I'm not going to argue about the past. My focus now is on the present and the future, however much of it I may have left. The reminder of my mortality hung between us, uncomfortable and unavoidable. Vanessa's expression shifted, calculation replacing anger as she assessed a new approach. "Eleanor," she said, her voice softening to a practiced tone of concern. "We're worried about you. The isolation, the secretive behavior, the sudden changes in your relationships. These can be symptoms of psychological effects from your illness and treatment. Dr. Chen mentioned that depression and anxiety are common side effects. Perhaps you should consider speaking with someone professional about these feelings you're having." The transparent attempt to pathologize my newfound boundaries might have been amusing if it weren't so insidious. "I appreciate your concern," I replied, my tone making it clear I recognized the strategy. "But my mental health is being adequately monitored by my medical team. Dr. Chen is quite satisfied with my psychological adjustment to the diagnosis and treatment." Vanessa's facade of concern evaporated instantly, replaced by cold determination. "Fine. If you insist on being difficult, you leave us no choice. Daniel has been too soft, too willing to accommodate your eccentricities, but this ends now. Either you start behaving reasonably, discussing your financial plans with us, considering appropriate living arrangements, and stopping this inappropriate influence over Sophia, or we'll be forced to take more formal steps." The threat hung in the air between us, vague but unmistakable. "What formal steps might those be?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Vanessa straightened her shoulders, clearly prepared for this question. "There are legal remedies for situations where elderly individuals begin making irrational decisions that harm themselves or their families. Competency evaluations, conservatorships. Daniel has been reluctant to consider these options, but I've been doing research. We have grounds, Eleanor. Your behavior since the diagnosis has been erratic at best." The naked power grab was breathtaking in its audacity, leveraging my illness as a weapon to seize control of my assets under the guise of concern for my welfare. "I see," I said quietly, a calm settling over me despite the outrageous threat. "And you believe a court would grant such an extreme measure based on the fact that I've chosen not to sell my home or share private financial information? That I've spent time gardening with my granddaughter? That I've established boundaries within my family relationships?" Vanessa's confidence faltered slightly, but she pressed on. "It's more than that. It's the pattern of behavior, the secrecy, the sudden changes to long-standing arrangements. Any competent attorney could present a compelling case." I nodded slowly, allowing her words to settle between us. "You're right about one thing, Vanessa. A competent attorney would indeed be crucial in such a situation." I reached for my phone on the side table, pressing a single button on the speed dial. "In fact, I think it's time mine was part of this conversation." Vanessa's eyes widened, with alarm. "What are you doing?" I held up a hand, signaling for silence as the call connected. "Jonathan? It's Eleanor Wilson. I apologize for calling on a Saturday, but I have a situation that requires your immediate attention. My daughter-in-law is currently in my living room, threatening legal action to have me declared incompetent and placed under a conservatorship. I'd appreciate your input on how we should proceed." The color drained from Vanessa's face as she realized the implications of what I had done. Jonathan's voice came through clearly on the speaker. "Eleanor? Are you all right? Do you need me to come over?" His concern was evident, his tone shifting immediately to professional alertness. "I'm fine, Jonathan," I assured him. "But I'd like you to explain to Mrs. Wilson exactly what legal standing she and my son might have in this matter, given the documentation we've already established." There was a brief pause as Jonathan processed the request. "Mrs. Wilson," he began, his voice crisp with authority. "I'm Jonathan Blackwell, Mrs. Eleanor Wilson's attorney of record. I feel compelled to inform you that any attempt to challenge Mrs. Wilson's competency would face significant legal hurdles. We have extensive medical documentation confirming her cognitive capacity, including recent evaluations specifically conducted to preempt the exact scenario you're proposing. Additionally, Mrs. Wilson has made detailed video statements explaining her decisions regarding her estate, property, and family relationships, all of which demonstrate sound reasoning and legitimate concerns about potential undue influence from family members." Vanessa stood frozen, her expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and dawning comprehension that she had severely miscalculated. Jonathan continued, his tone softening slightly but maintaining its professional edge. "Furthermore, I should caution you that threatening a conservatorship as leverage in a family disagreement could potentially be viewed by a court as elder abuse, specifically emotional and financial coercion. If Mrs. Wilson chose to pursue protective measures against such threats, she would have substantial grounds to do so." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Vanessa's shallow breathing as she struggled to process this dramatic reversal. That wasn't my intention," she finally managed, her voice uncharacteristically small. "We're just concerned about Eleanor's welfare. Her judgment recently has seemed impaired." Jonathan's response was immediate and firm. "Mrs. Wilson, in my professional capacity, having worked with Eleanor for over 2 decades, and based on recent comprehensive evaluations, I can assure you that her judgment is entirely sound. What you may be interpreting as impairment appears to be simply decisions that don't align with your preferences. Those are not equivalent situations." He paused, then added with quiet authority, "Now, unless there's anything else specific I can address, I suggest you reconsider the approach you've taken today. Threats of legal action tend to escalate conflicts rather than resolve them, particularly within families." Vanessa's composure, so carefully cultivated and maintained in all our previous interactions, had completely evaporated. She stood in my living room looking suddenly smaller, her designer outfit and perfect makeup incongruous with the uncertainty now evident in her posture. "I should go," she said stiffly, gathering her purse with trembling fingers. This was clearly a mistake. I nodded, feeling no triumph in her discomfort, only a weary sadness that our relationship had deteriorated to this point. "Thank you for your assistance, Jonathan," I said into the phone. "I'll call you Monday to follow up." After ending the call, I rose carefully from my chair, my body protesting the prolonged tension of the conversation. "I'll see you out," I offered, maintaining the basic courtesies despite everything that had transpired. Vanessa moved toward the door without meeting my eyes, her retreat hasty and undignified. At the threshold, however, she paused, turning back, with a flash of her former composure. "This isn't over, Eleanor," she said, her voice low and controlled once more. "Daniel won't stand for being treated this way. Neither will I." I met her gaze steadily, neither hostile nor intimidated. "No. Vanessa, I don't imagine it is over. But whatever comes next, I hope you and Daniel will remember that some things, once broken, can never be fully repaired." After she left, I sank back into Ed's chair, my entire body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. The confrontation had drained what little energy I had left after the morning with Sophia, leaving me hollow and shaky. I closed my eyes, focusing on my breathing, in and out, slow and steady, the way the mindfulness counselor at the cancer center had taught me. When I felt steadier, I picked up the phone again and called Martha. "Can you come over?" I asked without preamble. Something's happened. To her credit, Martha asked no questions, simply promised to be there in 20 minutes. As I waited, I reflected on how completely Vanessa's visit had illuminated the situation. What I had suspected, that Daniel and Vanessa viewed me primarily as a financial resource to be managed, was now confirmed beyond any doubt. They weren't simply disappointed by my assertion of independence. They were prepared to take legal action to override it if necessary. The revelation should have hurt more than it did. But perhaps I had already processed the worst of that pain in the quiet hours of introspection during my recovery. What remained was not anguish, but clarity. A stark, unvarnished understanding of exactly where I stood with my son and his wife, and what I needed to do to protect myself going forward. Martha arrived bearing a bottle of wine and a determined expression. "What happened?" she demanded as soon as she crossed the threshold. "You look exhausted." I managed a wan smile, leading her to the kitchen where I could sit at the table, rather than lowering myself back into the deeper living room chair. "Vanessa paid me a visit," I began, watching Martha's expression darken immediately. "She wants me to stop seeing Sophia on Saturdays, and she threatened to have me declared incompetent if I don't start behaving reasonably, which apparently means selling my house, discussing my finances with them, and generally doing whatever they think best." Martha's reaction was immediate and explosive, a stream of colorful language that would have shocked anyone who knew only her church volunteer persona. When she finally ran out of steam, she poured us each a glass of wine, pushing one toward me with a questioning look. "Can you have this with your medication?" I nodded. "One glass is fine. Dr. Chen actually recommended it for stress relief in moderation." Martha sat across from me, her indignation gradually settling into something more focused. "So, what did you do? Please tell me you showed her the door." I recounted the conversation in detail, including the call to Jonathan and Vanessa's parting threat. Martha listened intently, her expressions cycling through outrage, satisfaction at Jonathan's intervention, and finally sober concern. "This is getting serious, Ellie," she said when I finished. "They're not just being entitled and selfish anymore. They're actively plotting to take control of your life." I nodded, having reached the same conclusion. Yes, I think they are. Or at least, they're willing to consider it if I don't fall in line with their expectations. Martha took a thoughtful sip of her wine. "What will you do about Sophia? Vanessa could forbid her from visiting." The prospect sent a pang through my heart. The loss of those Saturday mornings would be a genuine grief, not just for me, but for Sophia as well. "I'll have to be careful," I acknowledged. "Push too hard and they might cut off access completely, but I won't stop seeing her unless they explicitly prohibit it. Sophia needs someone in her life who values her for herself, not just for what she achieves or how she reflects on the family." Martha reached across the table to squeeze my hand, her grip warm and reassuring. "You've changed, Ellie. A year ago, you would have capitulated immediately at the first sign of conflict with Daniel. You would have sold the house, handed over your financial information, stopped seeing Sophia, anything to keep the peace and maintain the illusion of family harmony." The observation was accurate, if somewhat painful to acknowledge. "A year ago, I wasn't facing my mortality quite so directly," I replied softly. "It has a way of clarifying priorities." We sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping our wine, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Martha spoke again. "What's your next move? They're not going to simply back down after this, especially Vanessa. She strikes me as someone who doesn't handle defeat gracefully." I considered the question, weighing various options against the likely responses from Daniel and Vanessa. "I think," I said slowly, "it's time to be completely transparent. No more hints or vague references to changes I've made. A clear, direct conversation about exactly what I've done with my estate and why." Martha's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're going to tell them everything? About the changes to your will, the trusts, all of it?" I nodded, feeling a sense of certainty settle over me. Yes. The secrecy was never about hiding the decisions themselves. It was about making sure I could make them freely, without interference or manipulation. Now that everything is legally established and my competency is well documented, there's no reason to maintain the mystery. In fact, the uncertainty is probably fueling their worst impulses. Martha tilted her head, considering this approach. It could backfire spectacularly. Once they know the specifics, especially if they're as unfavorable as you've implied, they might escalate even further. I acknowledged the risk with a small nod. Possibly. But I'm tired, Martha. Tired of the tension, the unspoken threats, the constant calculation. Whatever happens after I tell them the truth, at least it will be an honest reaction to reality, rather than to their fears and assumptions. Martha finished her wine, setting the glass down with a decisive clink. All right. If that's what you want to do, I support you. But not today. You're exhausted. And this needs to be done when you're at your strongest. And not alone either. I want to be here, and I think Jonathan should be present as well. Maybe even Dr. Chen, if she's willing, to address any medical questions they might raise. The practical suggestions grounded me, transforming a vague intention into a concrete plan. That makes sense, I agreed. Let's aim for next weekend, when I've had a chance to recover some energy. I'll talk to Jonathan on Monday about arranging it. As Martha prepared to leave, extracting a promise that I would rest for the remainder of the day, she paused at the door. You know they might never forgive you, right? Depending on what you've done, this could be the final break. The possibility was one I had lived with since signing the new will, a grief I had already begun to process. Yes, I said simply. But I've realized something important, Martha. Forgiveness freely given is a gift. Forgiveness extracted through emotional manipulation or financial control isn't forgiveness at all. It's just another form of coercion. I'm no longer willing to purchase Daniel's affection at the cost of my dignity. The week that followed was among the most challenging of my treatment. The radiation effects had reached their peak intensity, leaving me with painful skin reactions and bone-deep fatigue that made even the simplest tasks monumental efforts. Dr. Chen assured me this was normal, that the worst side effects typically culminated just before the end of treatment, but the knowledge provided limited comfort as I struggled through each day. Jonathan had readily agreed to my plan for a family meeting, offering to host it at his office to provide a neutral, professional setting. Dr. Chen had declined to attend personally, but provided a comprehensive letter addressing my medical status, prognosis, and cognitive capacity, which Jonathan would have on hand if needed. Martha, true to form, had organized a rotating schedule of friends to help with transportation and meals, ensuring I conserved my limited energy for the conversations ahead. Saturday morning found me sitting in Jonathan's wood-paneled conference room, Martha beside me offering silent support as we waited for Daniel and Vanessa to arrive. I had called Daniel myself to arrange the meeting, keeping my explanation simple and direct. There are important matters we need to discuss regarding my estate planning. Jonathan Blackwell has offered his office as a meeting place this Saturday at 10. I hope you and Vanessa can attend. Daniel had agreed with surprising readiness, perhaps sensing that the uncertainty was finally coming to an end, one way or another. Jonathan entered with a folder of documents, his expression professionally neutral, but with a hint of protectiveness as he took in my appearance. The radiation effects were visibly evident now. The fatigue etched in my face, the careful way I held myself to minimize discomfort from the affected skin. Everything is prepared, he assured me, arranging papers on the conference table. Are you certain you want to proceed today? We could reschedule if you're not feeling up to it. I shook my head, determined despite my physical discomfort. No, it's time. This needs to be resolved one way or another. At precisely 10 o'clock, Jonathan's assistant ushered Daniel and Vanessa into the conference room. Daniel's expression was guarded, Vanessa's carefully composed, though I noted she avoided direct eye contact with me. Mom, Daniel acknowledged, his gaze flickering briefly to Martha with barely concealed annoyance at her presence. You're looking, well, the hesitation betrayed the obvious lie. I knew exactly how I looked, had seen the shock in the eyes of casual acquaintances who encountered me during this phase of treatment. Thank you for coming, I said simply, not addressing the false pleasantry. Please, sit down. They took seats across the table, Vanessa immediately opening her designer planner as if preparing to take notes at a business meeting. Jonathan cleared his throat, assuming his role as mediator with practiced ease. Thank you all for being here. Mrs. Wilson has asked me to facilitate a discussion regarding her estate planning decisions. She feels it's important that there be complete transparency about the arrangements she's made to avoid any further misunderstandings or tensions within the family. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his professional mask slipping to reveal a flash of the anxiety that had likely been building since my call. So you're finally going to tell us what changes you've made? The edge in his voice was unmistakable, part accusation, part apprehension. I met his gaze steadily, finding strength in the clarity of purpose that had sustained me through the last difficult weeks. Yes, Daniel. It's time you understood exactly how I've structured my affairs and why. I turned to Jonathan, giving him a small nod to proceed with the formal presentation we had prepared. He opened the folder before him, removing a set of summary documents that he slid across the table to Daniel and Vanessa. This overview outlines the key provisions of Mrs. Wilson's current estate plan, he explained in his measured, professional tone. I'll walk you through the main points, and then Mrs. Wilson would like to explain her reasoning personally. Daniel grabbed the document almost eagerly, Vanessa leaning close to read over his shoulder. I watched their expressions as they scanned. The first page saw the moment comprehension dawned. Daniel's face draining of color, Vanessa's lips pressing into a thin, bloodless line. This can't be right, Daniel finally said, his voice hoarse with shock. There must be some mistake. Jonathan's expression remained impassive. There is no mistake, Mr. Wilson. These documents accurately reflect your mother's current estate plan, executed and notarized 6 weeks ago, with multiple witnesses present to verify her competence and the voluntary nature of her decisions. Daniel looked up from the papers, his eyes finding mine with naked disbelief. Mom, this says the house and almost all your liquid assets are going to a charitable foundation. That Tyler and Sophia only receive trust funds for education. That Martha gets the lake property. His voice rose with each statement, incredulity giving way to anger. There's practically nothing for Vanessa and me. Nothing. After all these years, after everything. He broke off, seemingly unable to complete the thought, the magnitude of what he perceived as betrayal rendering him momentarily speechless. Vanessa had no such limitations. This is outrageous, she snapped, slapping the document down on the table. Completely unacceptable. We are your family, Eleanor. Your only family. And you're cutting us out in favor of what? Some random charity? Your bridge club friend? This is exactly what we meant about impaired judgment. I had anticipated their reaction, had prepared myself for the anger and accusations, yet the reality of facing it still sent a wave of sadness through me. Not regret, I remained confident in my decisions, but grief for what our relationship had become, for the fact that my son could view my independent choices only through the lens of what they denied him rather than the values they reflected. It's not some random charity, I said quietly when Vanessa had run out of steam. The Second Chance Foundation provides educational opportunities for disadvantaged youth, children without the privileges and advantages I was able to give you, Daniel. Children who need the kind of support that might transform their lives the way your father and I tried to transform yours. Daniel stared at me, his expression hardening. So this is punishment, then? For not living up to your expectations? For not being the perfect, grateful son? I shook my head, refusing to be drawn into a defensive position. This isn't about punishment, Daniel. It's about purpose. About using what I have to create meaningful impact in ways that align with my values. Jonathan interjected smoothly, his calm professionalism helping to diffuse some of the tension. Perhaps it would be helpful if Mrs. Wilson explained her overall philosophy in restructuring her estate. There is a coherent vision behind these decisions, not arbitrary exclusions. I nodded gratefully, gathering my thoughts before continuing. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I began, my voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. It forced me to consider not just my mortality, but my legacy. What would remain of me, of the values I've tried to live by? I realized that I had an opportunity to make choices that would reflect those values in a tangible way. I looked directly at Daniel, willing him to truly hear me. The house that you've been so eager for me to sell represents security, something I believe everyone deserves, but not everyone has access to. By directing its value to the foundation, I can help provide that security to young people who have never known it. The lake property goes to Martha because she has shown genuine care and friendship without expectation of return, a quality I value deeply and wish to honor. I paused, gathering strength for the most difficult part. As for you and Vanessa, Daniel, the truth is that you don't need my money. You've built a very comfortable life, with resources far beyond what most people ever attain. What you might want from my estate is additional luxury, not necessity. Daniel flushed, opening his mouth to protest, but I continued before he could interrupt. Tyler and Sophia, however, are still establishing their paths. Their educational trusts are substantial, enough to cover undergraduate and graduate studies at any institution they choose. I want them to have the freedom to pursue their passions without financial constraint, just as I wanted for you. But I also want them to understand that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in contribution, in how we use our resources to create a better world. Vanessa made a dismissive sound, her expression contemptuous. Spare us the philosophical lecture, Eleanor. This is about family obligation, plain and simple. You don't disinherit your only child in favor of strangers. It's unnatural. The accusation hung in the air, its implicit judgment that my choices violated some fundamental natural law of family relations. I considered it thoughtfully, before responding, aware that my answer would shape whatever relationship might remain possible after this meeting. Family relationships involve mutual obligations, Vanessa, I said finally. They're not one-directional flows of support, material, or otherwise. For years, I've provided financial assistance whenever requested. The down payment on your first house, private school tuition for the children, renovations, vacations. I've adjusted my schedule to accommodate yours, made myself available whenever you needed practical help with the children. In return, I've received what, exactly? The question wasn't rhetorical. I paused, genuinely inviting them to articulate what they believed they had contributed to our relationship. The silence that followed was telling, stretching uncomfortable seconds into a full minute as Daniel and Vanessa exchanged glances, seemingly at a loss to identify specific examples. That's not fair, Daniel finally said, his tone defensive, rather than confident. We've included you in family events, kept you involved in our lives. That's what family does. The weakness of the response, essentially claiming credit for not completely excluding me, was so revealing that I felt a fresh wave of sadness wash over me. Daniel, I said gently, when was the last time you called just to ask how I was doing? Not to discuss financial matters or request something, but simply because you cared about my well-being? When did you last adjust your plans to accommodate my needs or preferences? When have you offered support without being explicitly asked? He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. We've been busy, he muttered. Work, the kids' schedules. It's been a demanding few years. I nodded, acknowledging the partial truth in his excuse while recognizing its inadequacy. Yes, life is demanding. We all make choices about how to allocate our limited time and attention. Those choices reveal our true priorities, not our stated ones. Martha, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, providing support through her presence rather than her words, now reached over to squeeze my hand, a small gesture of solidarity that didn't escape Daniel's notice. His expression darkened further. "So that's it? You've replaced us with Martha and this foundation? Written us out of your life as well as your will?" There was genuine hurt beneath the anger now, a flicker of the child who had once craved my approval and attention. It would have been easy to soften in that moment, to offer reassurances and compromises. But that pattern, my yielding to maintain harmony, regardless of the cost to my own integrity, was precisely what had led us to this point. "No, Daniel," I said firmly. "I haven't written you out of my life. I'm sitting here now having this difficult conversation because I value the possibility of an honest relationship with you. But it has to be a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine care, not obligation or financial expectation." I gestured to the documents still spread before them. "These decisions reflect my values and priorities. They are not negotiable. The question now is whether we can build a new kind of relationship from this point forward, one where we connect as people, not as financial resources and beneficiaries." Vanessa stood abruptly, gathering her planner and purse with sharp, angry movements. "This is a waste of time," she declared, her composure finally shattering completely. "She's made up her mind to punish us, Daniel. Nothing we say will change that." She turned to me, years of carefully masked resentment finally breaking through the surface. "You talk about mutual respect and genuine care, but this," she jabbed a manicured finger at the estate documents, "this is spite, pure and simple. You're using your money to control us, to force us to perform whatever role you've decided constitutes a proper family relationship." The accusation was so completely inverted from reality, projecting onto me the very dynamics that had actually characterized their approach to our relationship, that I found myself momentarily speechless. Jonathan stepped in smoothly, his tone remaining professional despite the escalating tension. "Mrs. Wilson, I can assure you that these decisions were made after extensive reflection and consultation. They are consistent with Eleanor's long-standing values and priorities, not reactive or punitive measures." Daniel finally spoke, his voice surprisingly quiet after Vanessa's outburst. "Could everyone please give my mother and me a moment alone?" The request hung in the air, unexpected and loaded with unspoken meaning. Jonathan looked to me for guidance, clearly hesitant to leave me without support given the emotional intensity of the conversation. I nodded slightly, feeling strangely calm despite everything. "It's all right," I assured him. "We'll be fine." Martha squeezed my hand once more before rising, her expression conveying that she'd be just outside if needed. Vanessa hesitated, clearly torn between her anger and her desire to maintain control of the situation. Finally, she exhaled sharply. "Fine. 5 minutes." The room emptied quickly, leaving Daniel and me facing each other across the polished conference table. 30 years of complicated history condensed into the space between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I waited, allowing Daniel to break the silence he had requested. When he finally did, his voice was different, stripped of the practiced confidence he typically projected, revealing something raw and uncertain beneath. "Did you ever love me at all?" The question struck me like a physical blow, so fundamentally wrong in its premise that for a moment I couldn't formulate a response. "Daniel," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper, "I have loved you every day of your life, with everything I am. That has never changed, not for a single moment." He shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "Then how could you do this? Cut me out of your will, replace me with strangers and Martha?" There was a plaintive note in the question, A glimpse of the child who had once needed my approval desperately, who had measured his worth by my attention and affection. Love and inheritance are not the same thing, I said gently. What I'm leaving you isn't measured in dollars or property deeds. It's the values I tried to instill, the opportunities I helped create, the foundation upon which you've built your life. I paused, considering how to bridge the fundamental disconnect in our perspectives. Daniel, when I look at you, I see success. You have a thriving career, a beautiful family, material comforts beyond what most people will ever experience. You achieved what your father and I hoped for you: security, opportunity, the freedom to shape your own path. My financial resources won't make a meaningful difference in your quality of life, but they could transform the lives of young people who haven't had your advantages. Don't you see? This isn't a rejection of you. It's an extension of the same impulse that drove me to give you every opportunity I could: the desire to help young people fulfill their potential. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice held a new note, not anger or entitlement, but genuine confusion. Then why didn't you just tell me? Why all the secrecy, the hints about changes to your will, the legal maneuvering behind my back? It was a fair question, one I had asked myself during the sleepless nights of my recovery. At first, I wasn't sure what changes I wanted to make, I admitted. The diagnosis forced me to think about my legacy in ways I hadn't before. But as time passed, as I observed our interactions during my illness, I realized something important. Our relationship had become fundamentally unbalanced. My value to you and Vanessa seemed increasingly tied to what I could provide materially. The secrecy was self-protective. I needed to make these decisions freely, based on my values and priorities, not in response to pressure or manipulation. So you didn't trust me, Daniel concluded, his tone flat. After everything, you assumed the worst about my motives. I sighed, feeling the weight of decades of complex emotions. Daniel, when you learned about my diagnosis, your first response wasn't concern for my well-being or offers of support. It was renewed pressure to sell my house and liquidate assets. When I established boundaries around those decisions, you and Vanessa explored having me declared incompetent. Those aren't the actions of someone primarily concerned with my welfare. He flinched, unable to deny the truth in my assessment. We were worried about you, he insisted, though with less conviction than before. Living alone, making major decisions during a health crisis. I nodded, acknowledging the partial truth in his defense. I believe you were worried, but your solution to that worry was to take control away from me, not to offer genuine support that respected my autonomy. A long silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken truths and painful realizations. Outside the conference room, I could hear muffled voices, Vanessa likely growing impatient, Martha and Jonathan maintaining a protective buffer. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice holding a hint of the thoughtfulness I remembered from his younger years. You're really going through with this? The foundation, Martha getting the lake house, all of it. I nodded, my resolve unchanged despite the emotional toll of the conversation. Yes. The documents are signed and legally binding. This isn't a negotiating tactic, Daniel. It's a reflection of my values and priorities at this stage of my life. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that suddenly reminded me powerfully of Ed. And there's nothing I can say that would change your mind? The question wasn't combative now, simply resigned. No, I said gently, but there's a great deal you could say and do that would change our relationship going forward. That door remains open if you're willing to walk through it. Daniel stood gathering the documents into a neat stack with mechanical precision. I need time to process this. To think. I nodded, understanding the request. Take whatever time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk again. He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. The radiation. How much longer? The question caught me off guard, the first genuine inquiry about my treatment he had made in weeks. 3 more sessions, I replied. Then a follow-up with Dr. Chen in a month to assess results. He nodded, absorbing this information. And she's optimistic? About your prognosis? There was real concern in his voice now, a flicker of the sun I remembered. Yes, I said, offering a small smile. Very optimistic, actually. The tumor markers are responding well to treatment. He seemed to want to say something more, but after a moment simply nodded again and left, the door closing softly behind him. Martha found me still sitting at the conference table, staring at the space, where Daniel had been. How are you holding up? She asked, settling into the chair beside me. I considered the question honestly, taking stock of my physical fatigue and emotional state. Surprisingly okay, I realized. It was difficult, but also clarifying, like lancing a wound that's been festering too long. She nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. Jonathan's calling a car to take us home. Vanessa left right after Daniel, didn't look happy but didn't make a scene either. I wasn't surprised. Vanessa's public composure was too carefully cultivated to allow a complete breakdown, even under these circumstances. What happens now? Martha asked gently. I sighed, gathering my strength to stand. Now we wait. The ball is in their court. They can either accept my decisions and work toward a healthier relationship, or they can choose to pull away further. Either way, I've done what I needed to do. The 3 final radiation sessions passed with little fanfare, marked only by the small ritual I had developed, placing a stone in a glass jar after each treatment, a tangible representation of progress toward completion. The medical team celebrated my final session with a small certificate and the ceremonial ringing of a bell that echoed through the radiation oncology department. You did it, Eleanor, Dr. Chen said warmly, reviewing my chart with evident satisfaction. Now we focus on healing and recovery. I nodded, feeling a curious mixture of relief and uncertainty, the structured routine of treatment giving way to the more ambiguous terrain of survivorship and whatever might come next in my personal life. Daniel hadn't contacted me since our meeting in Jonathan's office, a silence I chose to interpret as reflection rather than rejection. Sophia had texted several times, her messages carefully avoiding any mention of the obvious family tension, while reaffirming her commitment to our Saturday garden planning. I responded with equal care, keeping our exchanges focused on plants and design ideas, creating a space apart from the adult conflicts that threatened to engulf her. 2 weeks after my final treatment, as autumn painted Ridgemont in fiery hues of red and gold, the doorbell rang on a Wednesday afternoon. I opened it to find Daniel standing on my porch, alone and unannounced, a small potted plant in his hands. "Mom," he said, his voice uncertain. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, wordlessly inviting him into the home he had once been so eager for me to sell. He handed me the plant. A peace lily, I noted with a flicker of recognition for the symbolism, intentional or not. "How are you feeling?" he asked as we settled in the living room, the question sounding genuinely concerned rather than perfunctory. "Better each day," I replied honestly. "The fatigue is still significant, but the skin reactions are healing well." He nodded, seeming to actually absorb this information rather than using it as a prelude to his own agenda. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, "about what you said, about our relationship." I waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. "I'm not sure I can fully understand or accept your decisions about the will," he admitted. "But I've realized that fighting about it won't change anything except to further damage whatever relationship we might still have." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, not by any means. There were no tearful apologies or dramatic promises of transformation, but it was an acknowledgement of reality, an acceptance of boundaries, and perhaps most importantly, a choice to prioritize connection over conflict. "I appreciate that, Daniel," I said quietly. "Where do we go from here?" He shrugged, a gesture reminiscent of his teenage years. "I'm not sure exactly, but I'd like to try. Something different. Maybe dinner next week? Just us?" The invitation was tentative, a small step rather than a grand gesture, but meaningful in its simplicity. "I'd like that," I replied, feeling a cautious hope begin to take root alongside my hard-won wisdom. Whatever came next, whether genuine healing or merely civil detente, I had claimed my power to shape my own life according to my values. Cancer had taken much from me, but it had also given an unexpected gift, the clarity to recognize what truly mattered and the courage to honor it with my choices. As I watched Daniel drive away that afternoon, I thought of the gardens Sophia and I would plant in the spring, native perennials that would return year after year, blooming in their season, regardless of who might be there to witness their beauty. Some investments were measured not in immediate returns, but in the promise of ongoing renewal, in the faith that what we nurture today might flourish long after we're gone. My son might never fully understand or appreciate the choices I had made. Vanessa might maintain her resentment indefinitely. But somewhere in Ridgemont, a young person who had never known security or opportunity would receive a scholarship from the Second Chance Foundation. They would pursue an education that transformed their prospects, perhaps becoming the first in their family to attend college. And in that transformation, something of my values, my priorities, my essential self would continue. A legacy more meaningful than any inheritance measured in dollars alone. That evening, sitting in my garden as twilight gathered, I found myself filled with a profound sense of peace. The path forward wasn't clear or certain. Relationships damaged by years of unbalanced expectations couldn't be healed in a single conversation. But I had spoken my truth, had aligned my decisions with my deepest values, had reclaimed my autonomy in ways both practical and profound. Whatever time remained to me, whether months or years or decades, would be lived authentically, shaped by my own choices rather than others' expectations. It wasn't the future I had once imagined, but it was mine. And in the end, that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.